Hello, I'm Heena.
How do you do? I'm Dennis.
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Dennis, when were you born and how was your life before Second World War?
I was born in 1932 and I started school when I was 5, and that was at Golden Hillock School, junior school, in Sparkbrook. It wasn't long before war was declared in 1938, and then we were evacuated to Worcester. It was rather funny really, because I was quite happy about going away. There was no crying or anything. My mother was there to see us on the bus, but we didn't feel as though we were going away for a long time, more like a holiday. We were taken to the local station and then we were put on a train. And that train stopped at Foregate Street in Worcester. Then we were, when I say then, there was at least, I suppose, 200 to 300 children on the train. And they had escorts with them from the school to the station. And we were lined up, like as if we were marching, and we marched out of the station, along the main street of Worcester, which was all very strange and new to us, and over the bridge of the River Severn, which was, of course, an amazing sight, because we'd never seen anything so good as a river that big. So we went across the bridge and we were taken to a reception centre, and we were given something to eat and drink there.
What were you allowed to take with you?
We took with us a small case with personal things in, and we had a gas mask that was around our neck, and we also had a very large label with our name on, so that everybody would know who we were, and that was it really.
How were you assigned to a family?
All I can remember is that we were taken to a very large assembly room. The children had been split up, obviously, into different areas that they were going to be taken to. So we weren't assigned, as far as I was aware at that time, to anyone. We were just taken out of the assembly room and we walked down the various streets. And as we got to certain houses of people that said that they would take evacuees, then they took them as they came to the houses. So we didn't know who we were going to go to, except that if the person at the house said that they only wanted 1 or 2, they took 1 or 2. I had my sister with me, and so therefore it was more difficult for us to get a place, because most people either wanted one child or the other, either a girl or a boy. So we were rather one of the last few to actually get a place, that someone would say yes, they were prepared to take a boy and a girl into their house.
Who took you in?
Well, the first people that took us in, I can't tell you their name now, I've forgotten it. There were 2 men in the house, and there was a woman which was obviously the mother. One thing that I can remember was that they had a very large dog, so large that it had a big kennel out in the yard, and it was always on a chain. It was never loose, it was always on a chain. Yet being young and not worrying about anything like that, I had been known to go and sit in the kennel with the dog. And the dog was supposed to have been a very fierce dog, and yet I sat with it. They had chickens in rather large garden, and I think the main thing was that it wasn't suitable for us in the end to stay there. And so we came out of that still in the same street, Tybridge Street in Worcester. And my sister went to one house and I went to the other. And the other house was on its own. It was separated on that side of the street, Tybridge Street. It was by the park, Cripplegate Park. And I went to Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
What were these people like?
I referred to them as uncle and auntie. The man was Uncle Tom, and the auntie was Auntie Ivy. They were in their late 60s. They had no children. And Uncle Tom had been in the First World War, and he was a sergeant in the Home Guard. And his wife was someone that went to church quite regularly. So I ended up going to church on a regular basis. But they were very kind, and I suppose, having not had children of their own, they spoiled me, I suppose, in many respects. So I was quite happy there.
Do you remember what Uncle Tom had to do for his home guard duties?
I do. Being that he was in charge of a platoon, he spent quite a number of evenings out all night. And he was stationed out at the edge of Worcester at Gorse Hill. My aunt, who I called aunt at that time, used to take him lunch and I used to go with her. So we used to walk about 3 miles to where Gorse Hill is to take him his evening meal, and then we used to come back again. But one of the things that I found more than interesting, that's why I have a great understanding of geography, is that he had on the wall at home a large map of Europe. And we used to follow the war on the radio. And he had small flags that used to indicate where they were talking about on the radio as to what was happening in the war. So I amassed in my head an awful amount of trivia of the names of small places and villages throughout Europe. The movement of the war was going backwards and forwards at that time, which I found more than interesting. To sit there in the evening listening to the news, and we would have our flags ready, and he would have a notebook and note the names, and then we'd find them on the maps and stick the flags into the map. And I thought that was a bonding, I suppose, that we had together. It brought us closer together as two people.
Were you aware of the bombing that was going on around Birmingham?
I was certainly aware of what was happening. As I say, I was listening to the news quite regularly, and it told us exactly what cities had been bombed in the evening. We didn't know what casualties there were or anything, but it certainly told us that. And not only that, we were on one of the flight paths of the German Luftwaffe that went up the River Severn to find the cities in the Midlands that they wanted to bomb, particularly Coventry and Birmingham. So we were well aware, I was well aware as a small child, exactly what was going on.
Did you see any German airplanes?
Yes, I saw 2 German aeroplanes at different times. One was a Saturday morning, and we were playing in the local park, which is Cripplegate Park. And in those days, all the children were in the park. I mean, there were literally 50 to 60 children in the park, all running around and doing what children do at that age. And we heard a very loud noise, and flying very low was an aircraft. We assumed that the aircraft was going to the local RAF station. And therefore we were waving to it. And we could see quite clearly at the front of the aircraft, because it was coming towards us, that there were a pilot and his assistant at the controls. And underneath there was a gunner. So the aircraft was facing us, so we didn't know what sort of aircraft it was, but suddenly it turned. And from children waving and cheering the aircraft, it led to children running and screaming, because on the side of the aircraft were the insignia of the Luftwaffe. So we knew that this was a German plane and not one of ours. The other time, a plane got lost on its raid on the Midlands and came over the Malverns and Worcester and various areas like that. And it circled Worcester for at least an hour. We didn't know, but it was reported at the time that it still had bombs on board. And it was looking for an appropriate place to drop the bombs. It eventually found some factories in Worcester, and it dropped its bombs and went away. We later learned that the British fighters had gone up and had actually shot it down. So it didn't get very far after it dropped its bombs at Worcester.
What did you do in your spare time?
Well, we were very busy during the war, and so spare time mainly meant that it was a Saturday and a Sunday. As I say, Uncle Tom was doing his home guard duties. But on Saturday afternoons, he always went to his allotment. His allotment was at the rear end of his factory where he worked during the day. And it was a factory called Willis's that actually made officers' army boots and things in leather. It was a leather factory. And they had all the allotments behind the factory. And people used to grow an enormous amount of food in their allotments. And so it was always busy. So I helped him as best I could. But I did notice the moment that they started to play either football or cricket at the sports ground, which is at the other end of the allotments, I would be wanting to get away. So he used to say, well, you can go now. So off I went and watched the particular sport, football or cricket, whatever was going on. And that's why I have a lot of love for the game, even today, both sports. I have it today. It was born out of that. I can well remember one time when I was watching, and I stood a lot by the goalpost of the home team, obviously supporting the home team. And the goalkeeper rushed out to try and stop the opposing centre forward that was coming through. They crashed together, and the ball came tantalisingly towards the goal. So unthinkingly, I just rushed out and kicked it away. And of course, much to the annoyance of the footballers, I'd stirred a hornet's nest, and they chased me off the pitch, and it took me about 4 or 5 weeks before I thought I'd better go over again. They might have forgotten about it.
You said your Auntie Ivy went to church. Did that involve you?
It certainly did involve me. I was taken to church every Sunday, twice, both morning and evening. We had no Sunday school in those days. I don't suppose they could get the teachers or anything like that, but nevertheless it was the main service, morning service and evening service. And I can't remember a Sunday that we didn't go, but there may have been one, but we mainly went. And I used to sit listening to what was going on, which was far above me, what they were doing. And we'd been going for about 6 months, and the verger came to my aunt and suggested that I might like to join the choir. Well, I've always been a fool to volunteer for anything, so I said I didn't mind joining the choir. And I didn't know exactly how difficult that was going to be, because it involved training. And it took me about 8 or 9 months before I could say that I was a choir boy. We were given a black cassock to begin with, but we couldn't wear the white surplice that goes over it until we could be let out and say that we were trained to sing in the choir. You've got to imagine that the churches in those days were absolutely full. They weren't as they are today. And even the small church that I went to, St Clement's Church, it had a choir of about 25 people in it. And we used to process down the centre aisle of the church. And one half of the choir went to the right, the other half went to the left, and we went up into a balcony, because they had a balcony all the way round. And so the choir sang from the balcony. We also had a duty of pumping the organ for the organist. And it was essential that you pumped this organ, because the moment it hadn't got the air that it needed to play the tunes, it went off tune, and the organist wouldn't be pleased. So it was a difficult time pumping that organ up and down, and we used to occasionally do that as well. We didn't listen to sermons, and they didn't expect us to. They supplied us with comics for us to read during what was going on there. But for everything else that went on, we had to be attentive. And I suppose I used to like singing anyway, so I enjoyed my time in the choir, which I was in and stayed in until the very end, until I came back.
What was it like when you had to leave Uncle Tom and Auntie Ivy?
Well, it was a very emotional time. I got to love them. In fact, I knew them possibly now more than I knew my own family. I spent quite a time with them at a very impressionable age. My mother had visited me on a few occasions, so I certainly still knew who my mother was. But I must say that at the time that we had to go, I was very sad. But I came back many times to see them and visit them afterwards. And so it was one of the, I suppose my story of being an evacuee is only one of enjoyment and pleasure. A lot of other people may have had different experiences, but mine was a very fortunate one.
When was the last time you saw them?
The last time I saw them was when my daughter was born, and I went down to see them, to show them that I had a daughter, and they were so pleased. And that was the last time I saw them. It wasn't long after that I got a letter from them to say that they were moving from the house that I had known, and they were going into a flat. It wasn't long after they'd moved into the flat that Auntie Ivy died, so Uncle Tom was left on his own. I suppose that's the way it is. We've got different lives to lead now, and I was spending time not very close to Worcester, so that's the way it finished.
I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.